We're the book friends that think good.
What does this mean for our life, for our world? Yiggity yeet, my dude. I'm happy to speak. Always happy to think.
I don't know how to do that. I can look into that.
Makes you sound like a book friend that can think good.
It's Jack and it's Weston.
BFTTGs. Yeah.
Jack, I think good. Sometimes I good think, too.
Makes you sound pretty good.
We might want to make it more concise. We are going to attempt to grapple and answer 3 questions. Number 1, what did we learn? Number 2, what did we disagree with? And number 3, what are we going to do about it? I am ready to roll.
I'm in it. Weston, my book friend, tell me, what book is it that we're thinking good about today?
Today, we are talking about Chapter 15, The Cardinal Rule of Behavior Change.
This, my BFTTG, was a good one to me. I don't know. What did you think about it?
I thought it was good reminders. Good reminders for educators.
We're now on to the 4th law. So that's an important preface to this chapter of Atomic Habits. The 4th law is make it satisfying. So one of the things that Clear emphasizes here is in order for a behavior to get started, it has to be easy, attractive, obvious. But for a behavior to continue, it has to be satisfying. And so that's what why the 4th law is placed 4th, and also builds on the concepts from the other three chapters. Kind of a good summary quote for this is from page 185. This feels good. Do this again next time. That's kind of the principle that the 4th law is operating off of. He opens with the example of hand washing in Karachi, Pakistan, and how people knew that hand washing was good, but they just didn't have a great time doing it. So the government or a public health official working with a soap company, actually, it wasn't the government, gave them free soap, and it was kind of fun to wash their hands because it was like instant foaming soap, that foamy soap, and it helped them develop habits of hand washing because it was more desirable. So this was kind of the example that Clear launches off with and starts talking about immediate and delayed rewards. And I think from there we have a good foundation to jump in. Weston, my book friend, what was your first note?
Just that quote from right after that where he says, what is rewarded is repeated. And that was just, to me, it's like that's a key that educators must know and leverage. And understand that negative attention in itself is a reward to most kids. Don't think that just because you're angry or in your mind punishing them that you are. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of times where you might think that you're punishing a kid when you are rewarding them for what they just did. Mm-hmm. And so, I just made that note, like kids want any attention they can get, positive or negative most of the time, and ignoring is actually a super viable strategy. And that's something that I didn't give enough credence to in my early years. Being a young person and a young educator, you tend to be empathetic and you tend to be overly compassionate. Where it's like, I'll give this kid a 3rd, 4th, 5th chance. Kids are just eating you alive. Kids are just eating you alive at that point. They know what they can get away with. They know that if they, give you the puppy eyes, they can get what they want. Sap stories, all that sort of stuff. So, I think that's something that most educators learn within, a few years into their careers.
This is something I hear about in circles of creators, and it reminds me of we're approaching it from the negative, not the positive, but to do that as well. One thing people sometimes struggle with is trolls, online trolls. Talk to lots of pastors who have problems with this, lots of board game designers who have problems with this, and just lots of people who have problems with this. Trolling or bad behavior on the internet. And my advice always is don't feed the troll.
Yeah.
The troll will come back and get larger and stronger if it is fed. So just don't feed it. And it's the same principle as a fire, right? Like, what does a fire need to grow? Oxygen. You breathe more oxygen into that fire, it's just going to grow. Sometimes the best response is nothing.
Yeah.
And that seems so counterintuitive to us because we're taught that like you have to act and like your voice matters and all of this stuff. But like there's incredible power in silence in a noisy world. Also on that point, in this chapter, something I kept coming back to was game design. I was just thinking about like the whole concept of making it satisfying is so pivotal to creating a good game. Because the thing is like this is a simple principle that I think is really easy to overlook, which is, say I'm designing, something like a family card game or something. You want to reward the behavior that you want people to have the experience that you want them to have. So like, some family card games are very take that oriented where you're like constantly battling each other. But sometimes you want something that's more like cooperative or team building. In that case, you have to like optimize for the behaviors that you want to see. Do you want this to be like fun, fast-paced, competitive, or do you want this to be like kind of relaxing and fun? Like in each of those cases, you need to like work towards the behaviors you want your players to see so that they have the experience that you intend for them to have. And so, if you make the wrong thing satisfying by accident, you'll derive the wrong experience. I think that's exactly what you're talking about with Classroom as well.
Yeah. No, and that makes a lot of sense too. I didn't think about that, but that's with the whole game design. That's what I've been trying to do too with the simulations that I've been doing over the past 2 years in my classroom. I've been basically playing like simplified D&D with my kids, and it's been amazing. It's been amazing. Like it's been super fun, but it's been cool because I've built these scenarios based on the books that we're reading, so it like puts them into the book setting, and then they become a character in the book. And we'll like read a few chapters of the book, and then do this like simulation scenario where the kids have to like work together to do it, or there's a few that I've made where they have to compete against each other because like that's what was happening in the book. But yeah, dude, like making that gameplay loop satisfying at the end is huge for wanting people to come back to it and do what you want them to do in the game or have fun in the game like you want. So
yeah, it's so critical. I mean, it's worthwhile for thinking about any sort of situation that you have. There's a pretty funny example, and I'll just, it's actually right after this, I think, where a woman is talking about a narcissistic relative that she's trying to avoid. And in an attempt to spend less time with this egomaniac, Claire says, she acted as dull and as boring as possible whenever he was around. So he didn't want to spend more time with her. I think like it's just funny, like it brings to bear that point. Whatever is rewarded is repeated and punished is avoided. Let's see. I think my first note from this chapter was on the mismatch between immediate and delayed rewards. And I think, as I was reading this chapter, I was thinking of you the whole time. I was like, oh, Weston is going to love this because he's finally addressing that problem that we've been talking about for most of this book, which is like, he opens the book and gives that example of hand washing. And he says this a few times in this chapter. Everyone said hand washing was important, but few people had a habit of it. The problem wasn't knowledge. The problem was consistency. And he makes the point a few times, like knowing the good and doing the good don't naturally follow. Like, and the reason is because of our brain evolution and our delayed return environment, right? Like he makes the case in the last 100 years, we have more need to take delayed actions with delayed rewards. And, our brains developed in an environment where immediate return was if you followed the law of immediate return, you would not just succeed but thrive in life. And now, like, if you just follow immediate return, you will almost certainly fail in life and in, society. So, like, the need to take delayed actions is much more important than it has ever been. And I think about that a lot. One time I was driving with my wife and we were thinking about, like, our road system, right? Of course, like, the Romans built the roads, the Incan Empire had roads, but, like, the clutter on our road system, the street signs, the millions of high-tech devices that carry us from point A to point B at high speed, like, that's a modern marvel. Only in the last, 120, 140 years, right? Like, that we really developed a robust system of interconnected roadway travel. Like, that's a major advancement in our society that, like, our brains need to catch up to still. And then we think about things like air travel or social media and email, and that expanding movement is mind-boggling to consider in terms of brain development.
Yeah, I might disagree with you about the road systems, because I think the road systems are a perfect example, especially in the United States anyway. They're a perfect example of we were too concerned with whether we should or whether we could, and we didn't consider whether we should.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
there have been so many negative unintended consequences.
Oh, yeah. Of course. I mean, all of this.
So it's
all of
like
this
it's
stuff
like a
is
modern marvel, but it's also like I look at it and I get disgusted.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would
mean,
have to disagree with you about being in awe of it. I'm just like, I can't believe we did that. Like, just destroying nature, ruining ecosystems, and ruining ourselves and our society in so doing, in a
Yeah.
lot of ways.
I don't necessarily think it's virtuous. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that, like, it's look at it, how amazing technology is or whatever. I'm saying more like, and actually you prove the point that I'm trying to make, which is, like, we don't even know what we're doing.
Yeah,
Like, we don't
like
know.
that's what I would say. Yeah,
Yeah, we don't know how to handle these things. And to pretend that we do is kind of foolish.
yeah,
Like, he makes a point on page 188, and this was my first highlighted note, was compared to the age of the brain, modern society is brand new.
Mhm.
And I think that is a simple fact that most people don't contemplate at all, or that we really, consider in our day to day. Yeah.
I don't know. We all fall into. It's so crazy
I'm not
because you're
very-
right. We're right. Like, he's right. The author is right about delayed gratification. But because we've been able to delay gratification on so many things in our current lives, there's, like, always something to do also. Like you were talking about, people tell you all the time, oh, I'm just too busy for this, too busy for that. But it's like, that's true. That's true, dude. Like, people...
It is true.
Like, there's just so many things to do. So many... Because when things get become automatic, it creates that freedom that we've talked about. But then we always fill it with something, because that's just what people do. So it's like we tend to overbear our cross,
Yeah.
put too much on ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just a salient thing for me to keep in mind, because, like, I'm ignorant to this a lot of the time. I don't, like, stop and breathe and just, like, rest, because I get moving a million miles an hour just like everybody else. Like, this is the way we do things. And the first, like, learning for me was that on page 189, when he says, the brain's tendency to prioritize the present moment means you can't rely on good intentions. And one of the things he talks about is, like, bad habits, the outcome immediately feels good, while the ultimate outcome feels bad, while with good habits, it's the reverse. Interestingly, he makes a footnote about this where he talks about how the brain overestimates the danger of anything that seems like an immediate threat, but has almost no likelihood of actually occurring, like a plane crashing or a burglar breaking in. Meanwhile, it underestimates what appears to be a distant threat that's very likely. The example of like steady accumulation of fat from eating unhealthy food, or the slow creep of clutter when you fail to tidy up. I like reading that footnote, I was thinking about that. Like, man, I am not well adjusted to the slow creep of my bad habits. Like these distant outcomes that I know are likely, but that I don't consider immediate. And I spend a lot of my brain space worrying about things that will never happen, that seem like big immediate threats. I had a mentor one time who said that worry is 99.9% about things that will never happen.
Mm-hmm.
I try to think about that a lot because it's so easy to creep into that space, especially when life is so fast moving.
Well, and being prepared, dude. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
What if my wife and I hadn't been prepared when we had a leak a month ago, we wouldn't have been able to get our bathroom fixed. If we hadn't been, well adjusted and thinking about future needs possible and having a rainy day fund or something like that. It's like you need to be prepared, That's why so many things have delayed gratification nowadays, because we know that we need to be prepared. Same thing just happened to my dad. He went on a trip, got home, and his whole basement was flooded. If he wasn't prepared to handle that, that could be crippling. Like, so I think while you're right that it's like 99.9% of the time our worries are unjustified, dude, that 0.1% of when that actually happens, though, is terrifying. And I think that's why our brains evolved that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, yeah, it's that's why life is so brutal, dude, because you just never know. You never know when something will happen. Abrupt chaos will come into your life, and you can't live by the seat of your pants. You just can't. I mean, if you want to thrive, like we're talking about, you can. You totally can.
Yeah.
But it's not a great way to live, in my opinion. But yeah, I thought when I read that point, I was thinking about your point that we talked about early on in the book, I think, about people tend to overestimate what you can do in a month, but underestimate what you can do in a year. And I thought that was a good connection to what we had talked about with that as well. I actually had my first disagreement, too, on page 186. I had my first pushback, and it kind of connected what we were just talking about with the negative emotions. So Clear makes the argument that negative emotions destroy habits. And I disagree with that. And it goes back to when I argued a few chapters ago that our negative experiences are more memorable than our positive experiences. And I think negative emotions tend to cultivate bad habits rather than destroy good habits. So it's like a double whammy. I think it's worse than what Clear makes it seem.
I'm so bad at this, but do you remember? I remember studying like Skinner, B.F. Skinner, and like behavioral theory and stuff. But there's like punishment, which is like doing something to decrease a behavior, doing something negative to decrease a behavior you don't want to see. But then there's a concept, negative reinforcement.
Yeah.
Negative emotions can be, can like curtail behaviors, but they also like can sometimes lead to, it's kind of like what we talked about with the hose, like forcing a water through a hose, like the water might come out in a place you don't expect. I think that can sometimes be the case with our emotions and behavior, is like, yes, like negative emotions will have an impact on us, but we sometimes don't know what those are going to be, and we certainly are bad predictors of what those are going to be in other people.
Yeah. I just Googled negative reinforcement again to
Yeah.
clarify for us.
Mm-hmm.
Negative reinforcement is taking away an uncomfortable thing rather than giving a positive reward. So it's
Oh, okay.
like a good example is putting sunscreen on. Because if you do that, you're avoiding getting burnt later.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Where, yeah, so that's the difference. It's just not even
Yeah.
focusing on a reward. It's just taking away a punishment. I just really liked the line on page 192 when Clear says, incentives can start a habit, but identity sustains a habit.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a while for us to get to that point of shifting from, oh, I'm doing this for the reward to, oh, I'm doing this because this is who I am.
Yeah.
But getting to that point is what makes a habit stick. And so I found that to be very true in my life when you get to the point where you identify with something. And it goes back to that chart in like, what was it, chapter 2? Where it needs to start with the identity and move outward. So,
Yeah. I think, quite frankly, I think this is why a lot of people are leaving the church. I've been just thinking about this a lot. I think it's just like, it's this deep-seated like identity thing where it's like, at first you identify by the many, right? Or the powerful or whatever. Like, because you don't have handholds like this, like your identity is not a reinforcer to who you are. So like people come into this environment thinking like, oh, I'll learn virtue, or I'll learn like, how to be a better person, or, I'll learn about God, like deep spiritual things. But then you get into this environment, the many and the powerful don't exhibit the things that you hope they will. And it doesn't like sink deep into your own heart, like form an identity that's like, oh, I do this because, not because someone else is doing it or that it's like assumed from somebody else, but because it's not like intrinsic to me. And I think that's one of the things that I just hear people talking about all the time, like how they want to develop these like characteristics that are difficult to develop, things like patience, or that they want to be more like peace. They want to see more like peace or harmony in their lives, or something like that. Like they want to have like really deep, meaningful relationships. But there's like that identity disconnect where it's like they haven't gotten around to developing habits that lead to being the kind of person who has deep, meaningful relationships, or who has a peaceful outlook on life, or who has an inner sense of harmony. Like, because they just like haven't had the opportunity to exercise the habits enough to get to that place of identity in reinforcement.
I think it's a confidence issue, dude.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very difficult to be confident in our society, in our world, because
It is.
one, there's so much information out there that I think a lot of people suffer from paralysis by analysis. For one, I think the overconfidence effect is scary. Now that that's kind of a more common thing that people know about too. It's like, dude, I'm terrified of that. Whenever I get into something and I'm feeling like, oh, I actually know about this, I'm always thinking like, no, I fucking don't. Like, I don't know half of what I think I know about this subject. So that destroys I'm self-destroying my own confidence, right? In that. And then going back to what we talked about at the beginning of this chapter, the trolls. There's always people out there saying, like, as soon as you make some comment or say something, someone will always counter it with something else. I mean, it's crazy. Just like going through threads or interesting posts on whatever it is. There's always in the comments. There's always back and forth, people arguing both ways, and it's like, I don't know. I just got here. I don't know what's right. I don't know what's wrong.
Yeah.
So I think it's super difficult to be really solidly confident in most things.
In almost anything. Yeah.
In almost anything, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, even things that you would think we would have down, right? Like, I don't know, construction. It's like, okay, we've been building things. We've been having to build shelters forever. There
Yeah.
are a million ways to skin that cat.
Yeah,
And there are
totally.
better ways in the past than what we did in the future,
Yeah.
than what we're doing
Yeah.
now. Like
Yeah.
Roman concrete was higher quality than our concrete that we use most of the time today.
Yeah.
Japanese woodworking with
Yeah.
like no joint glue or anything. Have you seen that? Like
Yeah.
that's
Hmm.
those old techniques that just take longer, right, than today.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
They're way stronger. They last forever. So it's like, dude, there's so much ancient knowledge that we don't even realize, and there's so much knowledge that we haven't discovered yet that we don't realize. It's
Yeah.
so hard to feel like you actually know anything. It's
Yeah.
so hard to feel that way.
Well, and there's a big problem in like I think one of the solutions to this is an instant gratification solution, which is like cut those people out. Don't listen to that garbage, like just you do you, like that kind of advice,
Mm,
which has its place in some respects, honestly. Like
it does.
and we've
It
talked
does.
about this before, like toxic relationships, like that might be the answer is to take some sort of hard line there, or like behaviors that are destructive to your life. However, I don't think necessarily that that's a good prescriptive for life to say like, oh, well, if anything makes you feel bad, don't engage with it at all.
Yeah, that's a
Just
terrible thing. Yeah.
like don't worry about it at all. And I think like there's a fine line between like, can I read the comments of the trolls and not be affected by it?
Yeah.
Like just see it and be like, I disagree, but I'm not going to say anything.
Anyone struggling with that, my advice is go sub in some classrooms, because one, we need subs, and two, you'll get thick skin real quick.
Oh yeah.
Kids are brutal, so that
Yeah.
is something I have learned
Yeah.
for sure. That just made me think of this one interaction I had with a student grading something, going through something with them. And she says to the newer student, she's like, "Oh, that's Mr. Weston's grading face. It kind of looks like he has diarrhea or he's pooping really hard." I was just like, "What? That's the face? That's the face I make when I'm grading stuff?" But the kids are so honest.
Yeah, so I don't know. I guess my primary pushback here is also my call to action. I think in that so here's a point that Clear makes. He says, here's the problem. This is on page 190. Most people know that delaying gratification is the wise approach. They want the benefits of good habits, but the outcomes are seldom top of mind at the decisive moment. And he says, the best way to do this is to add a little bit of immediate pleasure to the habits pay off in the long run. This is both my pushback and my, like, here's what I'm going to do from this chapter, which is thinking about reinforcement, I think needs to change in my own life a little bit, because I have a very hard time adding instant gratification to the things I know are worth doing. Like, this is a problem for me in that, I tend to do some of the things like he talks about habits of avoidance and how they're not very helpful because there's no action in the first place. Like no frivolous purchases or no alcohol this month or something like that. Like my approach to healthy habits is often a resistance mindset like that. I think it might be something that's a bit trained into me from like maybe like I think this is kind of like a religious practice of like resisting temptation. Like it's very hard to make that a satisfying experience because you're like you're not doing anything. You're trying not to do something, which is not something you can make very satisfying. So reframing that, I think, in a way of being like, okay, how am I taking action on the things I want to do versus not doing the things I don't want to do? So, the example of going to the gym, instead of being like, no junk food, being like, I'm going to make healthy eating decisions and taking control of that, making that a satisfying experience, like applying this principle to positive actions and making them satisfying, I think is a worthwhile thing to think about how we can take baby steps and feel that instant gratification over time.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think that's huge. I
Yeah.
think the resisting, I find that to be a self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of ways
Hmm.
too. If I'm trying to resist something, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I end up like, because I'm thinking about it, I'll do it or do some form of it, right? Whatever it
Yeah.
is. Like, I think a simple example is like, you ever been like playing a sport or playing, like I was thinking about like, I don't know, playing soccer and I'm like, okay, I'm definitely like I'm not gonna let them score. I'm not gonna let them score, and then you like trip on your own feet and give up an easy goal or something,
Yeah.
right? Like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy if you're thinking about stuff too much. If you're thinking
Mhm.
about it negatively,
Yeah.
um, and then yeah, I think the satisfying thing is huge, and you have to. It's so hard because you have to figure out what is satisfying to you. Like there are certain things. Like
That's right.
one of the reasons I've discovered helps me with my meal prep that I do most usually on Sundays is I had to learn to be satisfied or I have to like make it look good, right?
Mm.
So like I do these little kind of egg breakfasts. Like basically I'll put a bunch of eggs in a sheet pan and bake it and then I'll cut them up into little squares for breakfast sandwiches, right?
Mm.
And it's like the better I get to like a perfect square on those, the more I enjoy
Mm.
that process at the end. Because I'm like,
Interesting.
oh look, I have a bunch of little perfect squares for like this week. Like
Got my egg squares.
it sounds silly, but like that's something that I found to be satisfying in that.
Mm.
Or when I'm cooking my chicken for the week, like the way it looks at the end is like that's the satisfying piece. And sometimes dude, I'll just like again to positively reinforce it for me, I'll take pictures of it. And like I have a little folder on my phone of like this recipe turned out like this recipe turned out like this, so I can look back on it, and then it becomes even satisfying, more satisfying
Mm.
again. And then if I'm like, like I'm like I don't want to cook, I'll like look at those pictures and be like, but I'll get that at the end, so I should do it.
Mm.
But it's hard
Yeah.
because I know that probably isn't satisfying for everyone else, but
Yeah.
for everyone.
That is an important thing. Like self-knowledge is so important in this area. Like
Yeah.
understanding what is satisfying to you. Like
Or
uh
the feeling after working out, right? Some people hate that feeling, but you
mhm.
eventually get to the point. Like it took me a long time to get to the point of understanding and like relishing a runner's high. Dude, until I was at least 21, I hated running. And I was sports. I was a jock guy. I loved playing sports, but I hated running.
Yeah.
And it takes a while to get to that point where you actually get into the flow and you're like, oh wow, this
Mhm.
is actually enjoyable.
Yeah. I've significantly reduced my candy intake in the last year.
Mm,
And one of the ways I use it is as a reward for myself because I love candy. So
mm,
I still eat it, but the only time I ever eat it is when I do something hard. Um, and one of the things I've been trying to do uh, with my work is develop thick skin. And one of the habits I've been doing for that, like the whole don't feed the trolls thing,
mm-hmm,
one thing I do is I read things I disagree with and don't respond to them.
mm-hmm,
Um, but that's an active posture, but it's something that I don't, uh, it's working on something that I'm trying not to do. And one of the ways I reward myself for that is I have a little piece of candy if I do it successfully. I'm like, I didn't respond to anything on Facebook that irritated me today. I'm gonna have some candy. And that's actually, I'm serious. Like it's been something that I've been doing to like not feed the trolls and like stay engaged, but like not lose my mind. Um,
issue for me would I wouldn't stop. I'd be like, oh, I deserve another one. Oh, I deserve another one.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
can't do that. That's the personal thing. I know I can't do that. I thought about this too, Jack, and trying to apply it to my life. And something that
Hmm.
I've been doing is journaling. And I've been
Hmm.
trying to apply that 2 minute rule that we talked about in the last chapter of just journal like 2 minutes. And so far I've only been doing it like 2 or 3 times a week. But I think what I want to go back and think about is why. Why am I doing this? Because right now it's just and the reason I've struggled with journaling every time that I've tried to pick it back up is I haven't had a really solid immediate why am I doing this? It's
Hmm.
always just a very nebulous like this will be cool to look back on in the future, And like, I don't have like a specific immediate purpose. And I think that's something that I want to at least look at for my journaling right now, but also apply to habits that I find myself struggling with. Like the immediacy, I think, is warranted.
Thank you for joining us, book friends. Next week on the BFTTG pod, Jack and Weston, they're thinking good some more with you, our book friends. Check out the show notes or the description, comment section for a link to the book and any articles that we talk about in the show. Bye-bye, book friends.
Bye for this time, guys.
Do a good thing today.
I love you.
Love you too, dude.